Welcome to our latest OMA's latest presentation, What Jewish and Christian Death and Dying Practices Can Teach Us. And I'm very pleased that we have two Oregonians that will make their presentations. I'll introduce them in a minute. I'm Susan Robinson. I'm the president of OMA. And as most of you know, OMA is a nonprofit organization that has existed since 1961 to educate and assist funeral consumers to know their rights.
Susan, you're on mute.
You're on mute. We can't hear you.
Oh, the whole time?
No, just now. Okay.
Oh, it means
You got it.
Okay. We have so many more choices than we did in 1961. And costs keep going up, but we're now also striving to do education about sustainability, and that being as responsible in our dying as we want to be in our living. So our focus is still on trying to make arrangements with mortuaries that will give our members discounts, but we really want to make educated, thoughtful funeral consumers, and education is our large thrust. It's supported almost entirely by contributions now, and so if you know of any grants or any educational opportunities that we can link with, we are looking for ways to get our educational message out to people all over Oregon and in Southern Washington too. So without any more discussion about OMA, I will introduce, I think, Sharon, Brian, I don't have a very much of a bio, so I'm going to let you talk a little bit about yourself, or let that come out in your introduction. But the first presenter tonight is Sharon Fendrich. As she is a member of Neve Shalom, Portland's conservative Jewish congregation. She has been a member of Chevra Kavod haMet since 2014 and in a leadership role since 2015. The Reverend Brian Marsh has been the pastor of Moreland Presbyterian Church in Milwaukee since February 2016. And I think I remember you came to Oregon from California, but correct me if I've got that mixed up. But we just met the other day.
From California via Missoula, Montana.
Oh, okay. But you're Californian originally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to start with Sharon. And Sharon also has some slides too. And hopefully our system will work so she can share those. Go ahead, Sharon.
Hi, I have 5 windows open right now, so let's hope I can do this all. So my name is Sharon Fendrich. I'm originally from Eugene, and I have been in well, let's just start with my screen share. I think that will make it easier because yeah. Okay. You see my screen share, right?
Yes,
okay.
I do.
Okay, great. So let's make sure that I'm in the right screens. Okay, I am. So if you have any burning questions, pop them in the chat and I'll try to catch them. If not, someone could interrupt or hold them till the end. I may cover your question. I'm not a rabbi. I'm not a clergy of any sort. I'm just a member, a volunteer in the community of the Chevra Kadisha, which is a group that exists in every Jewish community and in the world, and it is basically known as, translates as the burial society. So our job, depending on the community, right? Because every community has their own practices. Our job is to essentially prepare the body for burial once the funeral home has it. In Portland, there are two Chevra Kadishas. There's one that serves the non-orthodox community, which is the great majority, 90% of the Portland metro area. And then there's another group called the Portland Chevra, which serves the Orthodox community. And our practices are fundamentally the same, but vary quite differently in actual practice. I am the chair of Chevra Kavod haMet, which means basically the society that honors the dead. The word MET is the Hebrew root for deceased. So yeah, I joined in 2014, and my grandmother died in 2011 in Eugene at 101. And I didn't know what a Chevra Kadisha was or anything about Jewish death or burial or anything. And she had a pretty, let's just put it this way, the adult home that she was in should not have done what they did that night. So it was kind of traumatic for our family. And I asked the rabbi that night, is there a way I can see her again? And he said, well, maybe, let me talk to the Chevra Kadisha women. And I had no idea what he was saying. And turned out that, family, Jewish relatives are not supposed to see their loved one dead. You're basically supposed to remember them in life. And your community is supposed to come to your rescue, basically, and take care of your loved one so that you can take care of yourself and your job as being a mourner. But the women in Eugene let me come in to the funeral home and see her. And when I saw her, I asked me, I give her a kiss because I wanted to be respectful of whatever was happening. So I kissed her goodbye. And I asked them if I could tell them a little bit about her. So I told them some of her life story. And I came to understand that these women were going to love her with the same care that I had for so long. And I said to myself, someday I have to do this work. And it took about 3 years. And then I was ready to try, and just felt sort of like a natural doing this work. It's very much felt like a calling to be what I've now come to understand as being like a death walker. So I can travel in the death sphere, and though it's heavy and hard, I can carry it. So it's an honor to do this work. So I kind of want to speak to what we do in these death practices, and then in the Q&A, if you have specific questions about other things surrounding Jewish death, I'll do the best that I can. Put this on the right screen. Whoops. Okay, I just learned that also does something. Won't hit that again. Oh my God. Okay, sorry. So the two end-of-life services that we do are tahara, which basically means the purification ritual, which is what a Chevra Kadisha does. It primarily is the preparation of the body. And shmirah, I will explain later, is maybe what you've heard about, like Jews sort of either, pretty much from the time of death, staying with a body until the time of burial. We heard about that after 9/11, that there was always someone there until the last bodies were recovered. That was there for months, 24 hours a day, reciting psalms and being near to comfort the soul. The primary goal of any Jew dealing with anything having to do with death is to honor and respect the deceased and the mourner, to provide comfort to both the body and the soul. So we put that as our guide, which is kind of takes the us out of it and helps us get through that hard work. It's important to remember that pretty much with any religion, any congregation, there are variations in practices. So anything I mention is completely, you might say, well, I heard in the Portland Chevra Kadisha, or in Portland they do this, because it is not the same all over the world. It's even different in Seattle. It's different in Eugene. Not by much, not by the core of it, but it's important to remember that. And all of the people that work in our organization are volunteers. There are other Chevra Kadishas around the world that actually have some paid people because of the frequency at which they do it, or needing to pay for supplies or rental of the space or something. So tahara itself basically means purification. So that's the word that we give to the whole ritual. It's actually divided into different steps within, which I'll discuss next. Everyone has probably heard about, when a baby boy is born, 7 days after his birth, there is the circumcision, which is the Brit Milah. And then we hear about bar and bat mitzvahs, we hear about marriage, and we can probably, think about the images of those things we've seen. And tahara is actually considered the last life cycle event, because in each of these rituals, there's a complete structure, there's a tradition, there's a sequence. We are always preparing ourselves physically, mentally, and then we do the ritual. And then afterwards, we, restate the importance of the ritual. And then there's a formal, community and self-understanding that a transition has occurred. So tahara, there's nothing different in that. Even though the person has died, that is still understood in the context of the body, but especially the soul. You've probably also heard that Judaism has what are called like a mitzvah or mitzvot for plural, which essentially means a good deed. And there are hundreds of these, visiting the sick, feeding the poor. There's all sorts of things, different way, things you should do in prayer. And participating in tahara and doing tahara for an individual is considered like one of, if not the highest act of kindness and mitzvot that you can do, because the person that you're doing it for cannot say thank you. So it's a completely selfless act that you're doing. In some form or another, we have even biblical references to caring for the dead. Of course, it's all up to interpretation, but the earliest something we have that is describing something of what we do today is around the year 300. But when it finally was written down was in about the 1600s. So that's the basis that everyone has. One of my favorite things, that's the right word, about tahara is when we enter when we go to the funeral home and we're outside of the actual preparation room, so in the ante room, we ask forgiveness in that space. And once we enter the prep room and are in the presence of the deceased, we ask for the soul's forgiveness for any indignity we may cause towards the purpose of doing our work, because we never know what could happen. But if we set our intentions to be pure and very comforting and respectful, then we so you can imagine we're walking into the space, the prep table is there, the deceased is there, and they're covered with a sheet, in our case by the funeral home. We go in and we will, and through all of these steps, there are prayers and things that pull from all sorts of Jewish liturgy, from the first 5 books to other commentaries and poems and all sorts of things in Hebrew and in English, mostly English for us. So then we will carefully sort of, like imagine you were going to, do a ritual like a baptism or something, right? You're probably going to leave home freshly showered and you're going to be ready to go do the ritual. So we wash the body very gently. It's usually very clean in our case at the funeral home. And when we finish that, then we will do the actual purification, which I'll get to in a second with more detail. Then we dress the body, then we will place it in the casket, and then we have concluding prayers to wrap it all up. So again, you can imagine the rituals of the Jewish life cycle. Really, I mean, fundamentally, it's probably the soul doing those rituals if the body is just a vessel to contain the soul. So at the end, we're helping the deceased do what they cannot do for themselves, just like we would do for someone who was ill. The body is very often referred to in the words and the manual that we have, and the way it is looked at by everyone, that the body is a vessel which contains the soul, because in the beginning, God breathed into the body and gave it life in the form of the soul. Well, in the form of the body, you know what I'm saying. And let's see what else. Oh, so there's these really cool, you can find them online, images. There's many drawings from the late 1700s from the Prague Burial Society, and there's one right there. And we have these all on a board in our ante room. Just, in Judaism, the passing on from generation to generation of tradition is critical. We always remember our ancestors. We always, in daily prayers, we mention Abraham and Sarah and Rachel and Leah, and, they're all listed in there. So this is similar. We always feel like, this was done for our parents and our grandparents, and then we learn sometimes that that your grandparents participated in this or something. So it's a very passed down tradition. Even in death, we do everything we can to preserve the dignity and modesty and privacy of the deceased. So at all times, we have them covered with a sheet. And after we clean them, our initial cleaning, we will cover them yet with another clean sheet. Each phase, they get covered with another clean sheet. So we're moving them through their phases. When we are doing the gentle cleaning, I'm usually a leader of the team. We usually have a team of 4 people. I'm guiding to watch over the body and check for any bleeding that's happening, any open sores. We tend to, if there's fingernail polish, we usually remove it unless we cannot get it off, which is increasingly happening. And that is basically because we're trying to return the body to the earth as it came. It came pure and naked, and we're trying to return that. And that's understood in practice. So we, even if a family gives us a body and grandma loved to have her nails done, they understand that this is part of what will happen. And then, so any of those clippings or hair that comes off, if we brush the hair, or if we have some cotton swabs that have some blood on it, we have a little baggie and we put it in the bag in the casket with them. After we've done the washing, we will cover them again with a clean sheet, like I said. So then we move on to the actual purification step. So we have 6 pitchers that are filled with a certain amount of water. It's quite a lot of water. I don't know, probably like maybe 16, 20 cups, 16 cups maybe, times 6. They're big pitchers. And what we're trying to do in our case is emulate a flowing mountain stream. So think about long ago, long ago, you didn't have, what we have now, but you would take your body to purify it and you would dip it in flowing water to pass that purification over it. There's a lot of parallels in religion with water and flowing. There are some communities that have an actual mikveh, which is like you've heard of a ritual immersion pool in some Jewish communities where women might go each month after their menstrual cycle, or a woman will go before she's married, and it's just marking that phase, that change in something. So there are many communities that actually have a mikveh that is meant for the deceased, especially in Jewish funeral homes. We don't have that, so we can't do a full immersion. So we emulate the flowing mountain stream with the water that we pour. And in our community, we recite as we pour the pitchers, we just continually, in a very calming way, say Tahorahi or Tahorhu for a man, she is pure or he is pure. The way that we do this can be very tricky. You're dealing with someone who is deceased. I've got two people on one side and two people on another. The way the water pours is it goes down. You can imagine someone lying in front of you. It goes down from the head to the toe on the right side first. Then another pitcher goes down the left side. And we rotate the body a little bit. So we have this, we have to do this and the water cannot stop flowing. Then we do the right side back. Then we turn and we do the left side back. The last two pitchers go down the front of the body. So that's the best we can do when we're dealing with a table. So after that, there's quite a lot of water. And we have a whole pile of fresh towels. And the towels that we use to dry the body can then go to clean the table. But if we're going to dry the table, those do not then go onto the body. So there's still a separation of what touches the body is going to be clean and pure, and only, it's not going to go from the table to the body. Someone thought about a lot of things when they planned this out. So the shrouding is completely white, and it is biodegradable material, cotton or linen. We use cotton. And it is to mirror the way the high priest back in the days of the first temple would have entered the inner sanctum once a year to be in the presence of God. So a body is returning to, the soul is returning to God. The body is being left here on earth to return to the soil, and the soul is returning to God. So we dress them in white the same way. This picture kind of shows, you can see there's some pants, and all the way on the left, it just looks like there's one shirt, but there's an inner shirt, and then there's an outer shirt, which is a little bit longer, and it has a collar. So you can tell like it's like the outside of a suit sort of. And then on this table, on this lid of this casket, you can see that there's two pieces that have ties in the middle there. The one closest to the pants, this is a set that would be meant for women. The one closest to the pants is a veil. So that would be tied over the forehead where the ties would go. So the veil would come down, because the idea is that you're going, I don't want to say to be married to God, but it's a new, it's a transition phase for an adult, right? So you're going, but the eyes are covered because that's not needed for the soul. And then the piece next to it is a hat for a woman, which is sort of shaped like a bonnet. In the men's case, they only have one piece, and it's just a white hood. So there is that difference. Then there are, they don't have it in the picture here, but sort of like those pieces hanging down there, like the strips. There's ties for around sort of between the ankle and the knee. So like mid-calf, there's some ties, which people will give you 100 reasons why, but let's imagine it sort of makes it looks like you have boots on. And then I wanted to say also, you can see in this little picture down here that we have a special way of tying knots, which is very simple. And most knots are just tied, we tie them together. So people are always working in tandem, and we twist the knots, the ties around each other, and we tie a knot. And then when we get to the last one, we create like a belt, and then we create 3 loops. The other times that we do the ties, there's only 2 loops, but the belt is meant to be very special. We're finishing off our outfit. This is on the outside of the entire thing. And the 3 loops form the Hebrew letter, which looks like it does in the picture there. It's like a W almost. And that is the letter Shin, which is the first letter in the word Shaddai, which is one of the names for God. It's also kind of cool to note that I can't really speak to it as the bar bat mitzvah part, but if you think about the marriage ceremony, and if you look in the Orthodox tradition anywhere online, you'll see the man wearing that long white robe. That is the kittel, that is this outer kind of final piece of the suit. So that is the same garment that they will use when they are buried. It is the same garment that they will wear once a year on the Day of Atonement, which is Yom Kippur. So especially you'll see in an Orthodox community, you will see that happening. For our community, you will only see the rabbis doing that on Yom Kippur. But we know that's what they were married in. We know what they will die in, as long as they haven't gained too much weight, right? Then we very carefully put the person in, well, no, actually I should start at the beginning of this. I'm going through, but I have my list here. So there's sort of an example of a Jewish casket, traditional Jewish casket. It's as plain as you possibly can get. There are many Jewish books that have the words plain pine box in the title. There is no metal used of anything. Everything is, there are wood dowels that screw the lid into to the bottom. If the family has chosen in our community a casket that has a lining or a pillow or something, we remove that, because usually they are choosing that not for the comfort of the inside. They're choosing for what it looks like on the outside to make it look a little bit more. Some people find the plain pine box to be frightening, so they make it look more like a coffin that we're used to seeing. We as in traditional Americans. We line the casket, however, with like a giant sheet. Think of it as a giant swaddling that we lay diagonally in the casket. We push it down so that it's even all around. And we have a giant jar of soil from Israel. So we'll take a scoop of soil and sprinkle it down the middle of the casket over the sheet, so that when we put the person in, they will be buried in the soil of Israel. There are some Chevra Kadishas that will take that soil and sprinkle it in places on the person. So it can vary, but there's always soil from Israel that is placed in there. And we get that soil from people who go to Israel, and we say, hey, can you bring a sandwich baggie and please bring it back? So it's all collected. One of my most favorite things about this tradition that I always like to teach people is the word for casket in Hebrew is aron, and it is the exact same word that we use for the place that we store the Torah scrolls in the synagogue. So every synagogue where they put the Torah scrolls has the aron, and that's the same place that we put the body. Now we modify the word a little bit when it has the scrolls in it. It's called the Aron Kodesh. But it tells us that the body is as holy as a Torah because it contains God. So when we have the word of God, and when we have the breath of God that has made the soul. If we have a prayer shawl, sometimes it's called a talit or a talis, like you see in the picture. Usually a man wears that, but increasingly women do. And if the family provides us with one to bury them in, we will use that. Or we have donated ones if the family wants to use, we can use that. And we can put a yarmulke or a kippah on their head. Like my father-in-law, when he passed a year and a half ago, and even with my dad 7 months ago, we used the talis or the kippah that they had. So then we very carefully, hopefully we can lift the person ourselves. It's a tricky dance to get them from the table into the casket. Some communities will use yet another sheet to sort of lift them because it's easier to kind of have them in a sheet to lift them up, but we haven't tried that yet. If they're too heavy, we will use the lift that's in the prep room, and we will get help from the funeral home. After they're in the casket, before we completely swaddle them, we take, we also have a big jar of pottery shards that are, kind of like 1 inch by 2 inches or something that will cover the cavity of the eyes and cover the mouth. And there are many reasons, who knows where tradition comes from sometimes, that people say why we do this. And my favorite one is the one I've noted here from Genesis. Then we very tightly swaddle the deceased so that it then looks like a person that you've seen tightly swaddled in white. We close the casket. We again ask for forgiveness and any indignity they may have suffered because of us. Shroud Crowd is the name that we were given for the sort of community organization that we started here, of volunteers who make those shrouds. In the past, we've ordered them, and most people order them from a company in New York that just makes them. But we decided to start making our own, which has really become an amazingly powerful tradition in our community. We actually got like a massive donation of phased out sheets from a very nice hotel in Portland. And we had them thoroughly cleaned and everything. They were pretty clean anyway. And then we inspect all the sheets for any flaw, and those pieces get cut out. And then the pieces we have left that are completely clean, we cut into the different pieces and volunteers, so that when my mother nearly died 2 years ago now, I decided to make her shroud, and I didn't know how to sew a stitch. So the coordinator I sat down with her at her home, and we sewed my mother's shroud. And stitch by stitch, you go through this sort of anticipatory grief phase, which is really has stuck with me as quite beautiful. And so then I made one for my father, and my father died 7 months ago. So it was good I had it. And I know that he is eternally wrapped in my love. And that means it is just profound for what that means. So we always encourage people to do that. Traditionally, people did do it either for themselves or family had it ready. You never knew when someone was going to die. You never knew when you had materials to use, and you would make them, and they were all hand done. Imagine the work that was put into that. So just a little bit, I don't know how much time I have left. I didn't watch the clock. Shmira is this ritual guarding that happens now. In the old times, it was because, an animal or somebody could have come to desecrate the body. So someone was always staying with them. So traditionally, someone is with the person from the moment of death until they are buried. But in our community, we don't have enough volunteers to do that. So we do it from the time that we finish the tahara until the funeral home takes them away to burial, to the cemetery. And so that can be, it's usually 3 or 4 hours, but we can arrange for overnight at the funeral home and such. And so we're really there at this point in our practice to comfort the soul on its journey, because there is a belief that the soul is having trouble leaving its vessel and its home that it's had for this lifetime. And so we want to comfort it that it, in this transitory, phase, this liminal space, that it's going to be okay, and reciting psalms and offering prayer and comfort. So I think that's kind of about it. You can see our website up here. And I have worked very hard on that website. So there's a ton of resources. And if you have any burning questions, I still can't see the chat because I don't know what I did here, but, put them in there. And then usually I will, add that information onto our website. Someone asked about tattoos. If someone has a tattoo in our community, I'm sure even with the Orthodox, we will still bury them. I didn't, what's this funny? I didn't mention cremation. Cremation is greatly frowned upon in Judaism because it's considered a desecration of the body, because it's speeding up the return to God and the process of becoming soil. So the Orthodox Chevra here will absolutely not do anyone that wants to be cremated. We decided in our practice that we will. We don't want to deprive any Jew of having this final ritual. The costs, as you know, the costs of having a burial and a plot and all this can be absolutely prohibitive to a family. So if they're choosing cremation because they have to financially, we're not going to, take that away from them. I should also mention that we have done a bunch of green burials, in which case for us, that just means, since pretty much everything we do is already green, we don't use a casket, and we just shroud the person very tightly on a lowering board with the muslin strips, I think muslin, linen, something, whatever, burlap. They're very hot, very strong. And, and then, they're transferred to the cemetery on the lowering boards, which you can imagine is a lot of people are not choosing right now because it's too frightening for most people to see the shape of a body. But it's important to know that in Judaism, we don't really hide death, because you're going to mourn, and the raw nature of death really helps us understand. I always say that pain helps us understand the joy, and then we know that contrast. So when we're mourning and we're really suffering, you can actually feel it. So like at a Jewish funeral, if you've been to one or not, the most poignant time of the funeral is when we put the dirt, we put the soil back on the deceased. So we have a shovel that the grave diggers leave the giant pile of soil there, and there's a shovel there. We pick up the shovel, usually starting with the spouse, the children, the closest mourners. And you're going to scoop up some soil and you're going to place it on that casket down in there. And that first thud that you hear is deafening. No one forgets that sound. And it hits you like a punch in the heart. And it's supposed to do that because you can't hide the power in death. And then slowly, as the community ends up having come forth and putting scoops into the plot, there's a letting go, sort of. There's breath. We've come into this thing. We're going to do this thing. And it helps you start to begin the process of moving forward. So I think that's probably all I have. I've said enough. So I'm going to stop my share.
I need to ask a question, and I can't type and listen to you at the same time. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, listen, I just wanted to know, the people who are performing the ritual, they're wearing a certain type of clothing. Is that right?
So what we do is basically wear PPE. We have a gown. We have just medical gloves. We look like nurses, basically, with a mask.
Okay.
During COVID, when we returned, we still have face shields if people want to. Sometimes we'll double glove.
Is that clothing disposed of, or is it washed?
Yes.
What it is disposed
It's
of?
completely disposed of. Yeah.
Okay, how do you dispose of it?
The funeral home does it in their hazardous waste disposal.
Okay. Do you see why I couldn't type that?
Sorry. Yeah. Yes, it's I think it's personal protective equipment, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Sharon, your picture has gone off. It doesn't matter, but we've been focusing on the slides, so it hasn't mattered. But I show that your camera's on, but it doesn't, I don't see you anyway. But I
Can
think,
you take me off that spotlight thing? Did that do it? Probably not.
we've taken.
Oh, I'm
I've
still
taken you
here.
off. Yeah. So let's hear from Brian, and then we can have time for discussion and questions.
Okay.
That was a very interesting presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And go ahead, Brian.
Well, hi, everyone. Good evening. And Sharon, thank you so much for that presentation. I learned a lot in the past 45 minutes, just listening to the incredible beauty and power of the detail of all of the steps that you walk through in the Jewish tradition at the time of death. It is amazing the way that honors not just that person's body, but their life. And so I thank you for that presentation. And I'm coming to you as a pastor in the Christian tradition. I pastor a Presbyterian church here in Southeast Portland, Moreland Presbyterian Church. And part of what I was struck by as I was listening to Sharon is how much less detail there is in the typical Christian process of being with someone in the later stages of their life and surrounding them with love and with support and their families, and then seeing through that time of death, of passing, and then how we move into celebrating that person. And I won't speak as an expert at all on the details of these matters, because the Christian tradition has a pretty wide variety of different expressions. That are some that are more detailed, like the Catholic tradition, and certainly the Christian Orthodox traditions have rituals that they go through during those times of death and of burial and of celebration of those people's lives, both grief and joy encompassed in all of those. Coming from the Protestant tradition, it's an interesting contrast in that way, in that the Protestant tradition has tended to focus, I would say, more on the spirituality of the passing of a person, the grief that's involved, the celebration that's involved. And so where I am sharing some comments tonight are more from that direction than the specifics of what happens when someone dies. Part of that is that, at least in the Protestant tradition, a lot of those aspects of embracing and working with the family in regards to the body of the beloved departed, that is done in partnership with funeral homes, with the Maritime Society, with medical entities. And so what I'll be sharing tonight is coming a bit more from, I would say, the spiritual resources that we tend to draw from during that season, especially for family and friends and community who surround those who have lost loved ones. So the first thing that came to mind as I was thinking of this was my first experience of traveling to Kenya to celebrate the opening of a ministry there in partnership with the Presbyterian Church of East Africa. And while we were there, those of us from the West got a very interesting education in some of the differences in how I would say more of a Western conception of death in contrast with conceptions of death in other cultures around the world. The Kenyan leaders there spoke so often about seasons and cycles and circles and rhythms of life over which we ultimately hold no control. There is a presence of the divine and forces in creation that carry those seasons and cycles, the circle of life forward. And for the Kenyans we met, being largely in an agrarian society, planting, growing, harvesting, resting, whether you're speaking of land or you're speaking of human lives, there is truly a season for everything. And God is acknowledged as being present in all of it. And being a part of that more agrarian culture, there's a recognition that we human beings can't control things like the weather, but we can be mindful of when the gifts of creation come to us and to receive them humbly and with gratitude. And we can come together to support and comfort and encourage each other when we wait for those gifts to emerge. I remember speaking to a farmer there in Kenya, a man named Samuel, who talked about the years of famine and the years where rain was plentiful, and talked about how each of those years, each of those cycles were received as gifts from God. And in the times when the rains came, they were able to produce a more abundant crop, and harvest came from those years. And then from the years where the rains didn't come, they came together more fully as a community to support each other and to walk each other through those seasons. So life is seen in that way in a much more holistic sense, whereas we in the West, tend to conceive of ourselves as having some measure of control, maybe more measure than we actually have. But also in regards to things like death being a natural part of the cycle of life, often we like to stave that off. We like to think of it as something that's going to happen in the future. And when death does approach us, we sometimes have a very hard time coming to grips with that. We can't imagine our loved one will ever pass on. And when they do, sometimes there's a complexity of emotions that comes with that. And so I was really struck by the Kenyans as seeing all of this as one circle and one cycle. And at one point, I remember Samuel said, "Do you wonder why we sing and dance so often when we're together, in the hard times and in the good times?" And even if I did know the answer, I still wanted to hear it from him. And he said, "It reminds us that all seasons are all parts of the creation of God, and that we are created not always to understand or to predict or to control, but through it all to dance, to recognize that all of life is a part of this movement, this rhythm. And that includes embracing death." And that reminded me of some words attributed to the Apostle Paul from his letter to the church in Rome, where he said, "We don't live for ourselves, nor do we die for ourselves. While we live for God. And when we die for God. So both in life and in death, we belong to God." And so in the Christian tradition, we honor all of life as a gift of love from the God of love. And we honor all who die as bearers of that precious gift of love, each of them bearing that gift in a very unique and unrepeatable way. And we honor them in their lives and their death and beyond. And so when we have a service of worship, at least in the Presbyterian tradition and in other Protestant traditions, we call it a celebration of life, of love incarnate, love enfleshed, as witness to the resurrection, love eternal, love never ending, love everlasting. So we acknowledge that death is a very real part of our story. And Christians over the ages have found comfort during those times of grief and loss and celebration from a resource that we share with our Jewish sisters and brothers, the Hebrew Scriptures. So often in our celebrations of life, we share meaningful passages from the Psalms, from the prophets, from the poetry of wisdom literature. I think of Ecclesiastes, and there is a time for everything, a season for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. I think of words from the Psalms, like Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in times of trouble. The 23rd Psalm, even when I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me, your rod, your staff, they comfort me. There are many other Psalms that speak of God's presence, bringing comfort, but also bringing encouragement and bringing hope. And Jesus embraced this reality as well. We have things in our scriptures that depict Jesus grieving at the death of beloved ones. Jesus reminding his friends of where his life was leading and where all of our lives are ultimately leading, journeying through death and beyond to embody the reality that life and death are all ultimately parts of one symphony of spirit in that one love of God. And so to share a way that I've found helpful to think about life and death and beyond through my own tradition, I am a musician, and so I often find musical motifs and symbols to be meaningful. And so I would describe this as life and death and love, one symphony of spirit in three movements. And the movements I'm drawing scripturally for inspiration from Paul's letter to the church in Rome, some selected verses from chapter 8. The first movement is this, that we engage and embrace the reality of our suffering and death. And remember that dying seeds are planted in that season. I think of that image from Jesus' words that from John's Gospel in chapter 12, that unless a seed dies and falls into the ground, it just remains a seed. But if it dies, it bears fruit. And in Paul's words, all of creation is groaning in suffering and loss as it eagerly awaits the revelation of the children of God. And so everything in creation is more or less being held back in waiting, reined in until all creation and all creatures are ready and can be released at the same moment from slavery to corruption and decay into the glorious freedom of the children of God. And so meanwhile, as we wait, our anticipation deepens. Highlighting there that we all travel this journey in the same way, into life and through life into death, and recognizing that in that sense, we all suffer the loss of loved ones. We all go and enter into that part of our journey. And yet there is something there in the midst of acknowledging that, of recognizing that and embracing that, that also enables a spark of recognition of perhaps something deeper that's going on beyond mere physical passing. And so the second movement is recognizing and reawakening to the reality of grieving and hope. And this I think of as planted seeds just beginning to sprout or just beginning to take root, might be a better way to describe that. And I remember Jesus' words in the Gospel of Matthew that small seeds, once they die and are planted and rooted into the ground, can create large and healthy expressions of life. Paul's words continuing. We know that from the beginning until now, all of creation is pregnant. The painful times that cause us to groan are birth pangs as a part of one great act of giving birth. And it's not only around us in creation, but also within us as creatures. We too groan inwardly as we wait for our bodies to be set free by the Spirit. That's why waiting does not diminish us any more than waiting diminishes a pregnant mother. We are enlarged in the waiting. Of course, we don't see what is enlarging us, but the longer we wait, the larger we become, and the more joyful our expectancy. The Spirit, too, comes to help us in our weariness and our weakness. For in these moments, we don't really know what to say or how to pray. But the Spirit expresses our sighs with groanings too deep for words. And God, who knows everything in our hearts, knows perfectly well what the Spirit is saying, because her intercessions for God's beloved people are made according to the mind of God. That's why we know that God makes sure everything in our lives, the pain and the pleasure, is worked together into something good. God created all beloveds to share the image of God in order that God might be the primal image for our lives to reflect. So in that second movement, as we're in that season of grieving, we stay in it, we abide in it. We allow people who have lost loved ones that space to be able to grieve, to remember. And we do different things in ways that we can to surround them and support them, not just with our prayers, but with our presence, often in silence, often simply being a loving support through being present, through offering our friendship, through offering words of hope that we remember from our tradition, from our scriptures, from our life experiences. And yet our first calling in those times of mourning is to remember the response of Jesus at the death of his friend Lazarus. He didn't really say anything. He simply was, and he grieved with them. And yet in our grief, we also recognize that something else is stirring, and that as we abide, as we sit with our grief and don't try to move through it or deny it or push it aside, that something happens in the waiting, that we find that our hearts, our spirits are actually enlarged. But they're kind of like seeds in the ground. We don't dig them up to look at them and see how they're growing. It's just happening in ways that are unseen. Well, that leads into the third movement, which I see as remembering and rejoicing in the reality of eternal love and life. And that is those rooted and sprouted seeds popping up through the surface and beginning to take shape and form and eventually blossoming into new expressions of hope and life. And I'm reminded of Jesus reminding his friends that love, God's love, is truly present in all times, and that love is ultimately stronger than death. Paul puts it this way: what is our response to all of this? Simply this: if God is for us, who can be against us? What will separate us from the love of God? trouble, calamity, persecution, hunger, nakedness, danger, violence. No. In all this, we are more than conquerors because of God who loves us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor principalities, neither the present nor the future, neither heights nor depths, nor anything else in all of creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is with us in Jesus the Christ. So the cycle moves us through acknowledging the reality of death and loss, grieving that loss, and yet, as Paul says elsewhere, grieving as those who do have hope. And then remembering and rejoicing in that reality of love that is ultimately stronger than death and that embraces death as a part of life. The way that we express that in the Christian tradition, as I mentioned earlier, is primarily through what at least we in the Protestant tradition call a celebration of life as witness to the resurrection. And that is a time both for collective grief, but also for collective remembrance, recollection, sharing stories, sharing memories, sharing ways that that person's life has impacted our lives. If each of us is a divine incarnation in one way or another, then we recognize that that person not only had an impact while they walked this planet, but that person's impact continues to live on in spirit through our lives and through the ways that they have helped to shape and form us. That's a gift that we then share with each other as we help to shape and form each other in that same love. And so there is both grieving and there is hope in the Christian tradition, and we draw upon both as sources of strength, as sources of comfort, as sources of empowerment. The ways that those celebrations can happen are almost as varied as human beings, because many of those celebrations still will happen in a sanctuary of gathering for a Christian faith community. There are others who are choosing to have those celebrations out in a spot in God's creation, in nature, particularly a place that may be meaningful to the departed. There are some who choose to do a combination of both. They'll have a celebration of life at a church gathering place, and then they will go to a graveside to have a time to offer up that person into the loving arms of God. And as we say in all of our celebrations, at some point or another, we recognize that this person has come from the earth, from dust, and this person is now returning earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Personally, when I do that liturgy, I also add stardust to stardust as a way to recognize that dust of which we are created is connected in ways that we ultimately really can't describe, but we experience. So to close, I just wanted to mention a couple of resources that we can make available to you if you're interested in finding out more specifics about ways that people celebrate, but also some resources for when people are in those seasons of grief and ways that communities can come and support each other during those seasons, as well as practical considerations. The booklet that I'm thinking of is called Journey Through the Valley, a Presbyterian resource for end-of-life issues. And I believe Margot is able to put that in the group chat, a link where you can download that booklet to have those resources readily at hand for anyone who may be interested. And the other one that I wanted to mention, I mean, there are a plethora of resources that can be helpful during that season of life. One that I've found I'm going to do it old fashioned here and see if you can see it on my screen, but this is a book by Henry Nouwen called Our Greatest Gift, a meditation on dying and caring. And what Nouwen does, in a very brief, considers death as actually a gift. And it's a gift not only that we can give to others in caring for those who have lost loved ones, but also as we ourselves consider our own deaths, at least those of us who have the opportunity to consider it. How are we living our lives in such a way that our deaths can actually be a blessing, a gift that can plant seeds in other people's lives, the soil of their hearts, and blossom into fruit that is life-giving and bears encouragement and hope for others. So that's what I have to share for tonight. I think we're going to move to a time of Q&A, but thank you for the chance to be able to share with you all.
Thank you very much, Brian. I don't know what questions have gone into the chat. Do we have questions beside or comments? As I was thinking about this presentation or this session tonight, was realizing that the enormous impact that our communities have on us in life and in dying. And I'm interested in what I see as a contrast between what Sharon said, that Jews undertake to show the love to a deceased member so that the family doesn't have to see that the person in death and can remember them in life. And that's somewhat contrasted with our idea that an open casket is therapeutic, isn't it? I don't know if you have any comments about that, and I think I understand that in Oregon, as many as 60% of us are getting cremated. So there's not a body present, but very often, I mean, that's what cremation has sort of done, that and mortuaries making us up and making us lifelike. It's a combination between accepting that the person is lying there, but they're so lifelike they aren't maybe even gone, But that's very much a contrast with what Sharon was describing, shielding the family from seeing it and giving them time away while the community takes care of the body and remembers the person for the family. Oh, Nancy has said, being made up still makes them look like wax figures. Are there other questions? Has anyone put a question in the chat or Bill?
There was a question in the chat about whether funeral homes might make available the body washing that was described today, might make that available to other groups than Jewish people who have a hands-on preparation of the body.
Right.
They may not be Jewish at all, and yet they want to participate in that with their deceased.
Right. That happens a lot in the Muslim community because they do the same ritual sometimes in terms of preparation of the body. And so do And Native Americans do not go to a funeral home at all. They do everything themselves. They do the washing, they do the burial, they do everything. The funeral home is not involved at all. And it's across the board in terms of what people do to celebrate death, because if you go down south, where my relatives are from, it's a party, a parade. It's all at one. It's a big celebration, and funerals are a big thing. You know, in New Orleans, they hire the second line bands and the front line bands and all of the other things, and it's a parade and a big celebration. But and everybody is basically engaged, you know, in the whole entire ritual, you know. And I mean, there's crying, there's laughing, but for the most part, there's a lot of celebration, a lot of eating, a lot of drinking, the whole 9 yards, just to celebrate this particular person's. And they call it a homegoing. They just don't call them funerals anymore. They call them homegoings, because they're acknowledging the full circle. But I've been to funerals where there's hardly a tear shed. I've been to funerals where there's just all kinds of crying and people passing out and all kinds of other things. So you've got everything from A to Z in terms of how people celebrate death. And I think the worst part of death is when a person has to die alone, because they have nobody to come there to be with them as they pass away. And that happens a lot, because a lot of people are left alone these days. And if you're not connected or have a family member or something, they die alone. And I think there should be some type of program or something for people. Say the hospital can call somebody and say, you know, this person is passing away and they have no relatives. Can you come and sit with the body or something like that? Because I think it's just kind of terrible that they transition into death and nobody's there, you know. But that's just me. That's just my interpretation of it.
Well, it is one of the parts of the history of hospice work, actually,
Right,
is the idea that nobody should die alone.
right.
But that prompts me, it's a a minutiae question, but do Jewish people use hospice care very much? And if they do, is the instruction given to the nurse, don't cleanse the body, the team will come and do it?
Well, that's a very, very big question. I can speak to my personal experience 7 months ago with my dad, who was on hospice. But I would, hospice is not viewed as something that would not be in alignment with Jewish tradition. Hospice is for the living.
That's right.
And it is, it comes after a time of acceptance that this body is dying, and it has, in theory, reached a point of no return. I mean, hospice does reassessments, but people will hear that Judaism does everything possible to preserve a life, and that life is most sacred. So there are stages of a debate. Like a family could say, do we take them off of life support because that's sustaining life? There are those questions, but the prevailing answers to those questions are we hastening death? Are we prolonging life? There are fine lines between these things. Mm-hmm. And then comes into play, are we causing harm to the person? Are they suffering? Mm-hmm. So overall, we want to ease suffering, and that's what hospice should be doing. Right. It's not what happened with my dad. Mm-hmm. So when we talk about someone, you know, there's these things, no one dies alone. You know, I have an audience here. I can tell you personal experience, my opinion, please do not count on anyone to be there with your loved one. even a friend, whatever. Do not count on anyone to be providing anything. You can take it upon yourself to be there in that moment with that person. Death comes when it comes, but if you have any kind of warning, it can come very fast.
Mm-hmm.
It can come very slow, but to do what you can to be there and to comfort. Hospice often does not have the bandwidth to be there with your loved one. That's not the way their structure is built.
Right.
So just ask the questions, be extensive in asking. I did want to say too, I think I've only done it once, but we will go wherever we are needed. So like, I did a home tahara. So they wanted to transfer her straight from, she was donating her body to OHSU. So we did the tahara at the house, and took her outside and used a garden hose and did a whole thing. We moved her right from her deathbed. But we've had other ones where people were buried on their own property. So we went there and we bring all our supplies. So we go wherever someone wants us to be, I should say. That's important to know.
Yes, you didn't mention, I thought Jewish people preferred to be, or that one of the teachings was that they're buried by sundown on the day of death.
Well, traditionally, you want to try to bury someone within 24 hours because you want to get them in the ground as soon as you can, so that they can return to the earth. But what's developed over time was it kind of got extended a little bit so that close family could get into town, right? But originally family was all together anyhow. And now, honestly, good luck getting someone buried within 24 hours in the United States, especially if your cemetery is run by the city or metro or whatever, because you've got to be dying on a weekday. You've got to have grave diggers available. You got to have funeral homes with a schedule. And so I think we're lucky when we get it within 48 hours, but I think it's more like we're seeing, depending on when, maybe 55 to 60 hours. But it's also important to know that in the Jewish religion, we don't bury anyone on the Sabbath, which is Saturday, or Friday at sundown till Saturday at sundown. So if someone dies on Friday, they're not going to be buried till earliest Sunday.
Okay.
And there are special holy days as well that we don't bury on, but that's the main thing to know that happens that Saturday is a big hole. So.
Right.
Walt here. We just had our first kosher burial 2 months ago. And it was a case of, we got the call in the early afternoon and the burial was completed within 23 hours. So it can be done. And we're standing by ready to do it. So.
Walt is from Herland Forest and is a body composting organization.
Most of what we do is enhance natural burial, though.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Right. One of the things I wanted to say real quickly is that I really enjoyed Pastor Marsh's reference to Ecclesiastes. And I thought, when you were talking, Ecclesiastes popped into my head and I said, geez, I hope he mentions that. And you did. And what happened was that the last funeral I attended had that in their little bulletin thing, the memorial. And there's a book by Leo and Diane Dillon, and it's a picture book, and it talks about the seasons, and it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And I ordered the book and sent it to the family. But I think if everybody lived by those particular words, that tragedy and death and all the things that have to do with life would come a lot easier if you embrace those particular scriptures. And I mean, it's easy to say, but it's hard to put in practice, because every time something goes wrong, like stubbing your toe, you go, oh my God, what do I do about this? And But if you realize that that's a part of life, and it's a circle that you have to remember. And one of the sermons that I remembered was, look at every day is a day that might be your last day. And how would you live it? And so many people don't want to do that because they've got their planner and they've got their iPod and all that other stuff planned up till the next 99 days, but nobody wants to embrace death as something to, and the way I look at it is, if something goes wrong, I say, would this really matter if I knew I was going to be dying in the next 24 hours, And it makes life a lot easier when you embrace those particular things. And there are people that go on and on about minutia. You go, why are you bothering with
I'm
this?
one of those.
Oh, you're a minutia person?
No, too much, but
Detail. I know. I do that myself. If nothing isn't planned up to the T, I just go into fits or something. I don't know. But it happens to the best of us. You want everything to run according to a well-oiled machine, But they always say, make plans and watch God laugh.
well, that
Carol,
Brian was
thanks for
talking about
sharing that. What was the name of that book?
It's by Leo and Diane Dillon, and
Mhm.
it's and that's all I know. They're the illustrators, and
Okay.
yeah, I can run and get it. And hang on a second. Keep on talking. I'll go get it.
Thanks.
Are there any other comments or questions? I was thinking, because I know that one of the provisions of the funeral rule is that every mortuary must accept any vessel or a cremation urn or a casket that we want to bring. And I was thinking, well, I certainly would order one of those pine boxes for green burial if I wanted a box at all. Is it, are they made by special organizations, or how does one buy just a plain pine box?
Well, when you go to the funeral home to select your casket, you're going to have to ask for it. It's highly unlikely they're going to have it on display.
Mhm.
But
Right.
you can choose whatever you want for your death or your loved one's death. I would put it in the pre-planning. If you do prepayment of any kind, I would at least put that in there. Always let people know who are close to you what your burial wishes are. That's critical. If you can, do your advance directive, do your post, please, please, please. Save yourself and family suffering and anguish at that time. But yeah, it's probably the cheapest one out there. So,
and you might be able to go to Costco. Huh.
It's very close.
Yes.
Anyway, I found the book. It's called To Everything There Is a Season. And it's by Leo and Diane Dillon. It's illustrated by them. And it's been around for quite a long time, but it's a beautiful picture book. You could give it to children or adults or anything like that. And each one of the paintings are from different ethnicities.
Oh,
it's really a beautiful book. And it tells you at the end all about the illustrations. But
thank you so much for sharing that,
Carol. Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. It's my go-to book.
Bill, I see that you have a hand raised.
Yes. I'm wondering, maybe, is there a place, are there some places where burial can be minimally protected body with a shroud probably only, and directly into the earth?
Yeah, we do that all the time. And some people choose to go out exactly as they came into the world.
Right.
And that's fine too. We basically cocoon the body in wood chips. So even if there's nothing there, we lay down a bed of wood chips, lay the body on top of the chips, and then lay more wood chips on top of the body. So so we basically create a wooden shroud in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And is an unprotected burial currently available in the cemeteries in the metro area?
I can't tell you.
Mhm.
You'll
Did
have to ask them what it is.
Did anybody see Shark Tank where these people were presenting natural burial? Did anybody see that?
Yep.
They were presenting natural burial, but they didn't get any funding because they said that there was too many other people doing the same thing. But
Well,
I wouldn't have given them any funding either, because when they presented it, I said, don't they know about Oregon? But anyway, it was interesting thinking they had something novel.
no, Mike has been developing his operation from the very earliest, and there are three of us that are licensed to do that work. We were the very first funeral facility
In Oregon or in Oregon and Washington?
In what? Well, Washington recognizes the credentials of funeral directors and stuff in Oregon.
Uh-huh.
So a number of the people that we provide natural organic reduction for are from Oregon. But we just did one about 4 months ago that was from Portland, Maine.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So that's another form of Portland. So it's pretty straightforward these days to air transport remains across the country. We just did one from Philadelphia where the air freight was $5.50.
And just many of you know this, but in researching that, some of the funeral consumers alliances have discovered that no airline requires that a body be embalmed. It used to be sort of understood, oh, you just can't trans. The important thing is to have a body. They require it to be in a zipped body bag, but on ice, be kept cold.
Right.
That's the important thing.
There are some.
It doesn't have to be shipped in a casket, you mean?
Nope.
Oh,
Not necessarily, no.
Okay.
Just an it's basically a body bag.
Oh, okay.
A thick plastic container.
Okay.
That is then shrouded with what's called an air crate, a tray, and then a cardboard covering is put over the body, and it's all strapped together.
Oh, okay.
And then it flies.
I mean,
they call us.
It is in something that people can handle. That's not a floppy bag, yes, but
no, it's
cardboard.
It's heavy.
Yeah.
It's heavy. Yeah. We just we can actually inter a body within 5 hours of it landing in Portland.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a real advantage to using a location like Herland, because I know Riverview is doing green burials directly into the ground, but I imagine it wouldn't be anywhere near 24 hours,
Right.
like you said. But yeah, they're doing it. It just takes a lot longer.
Yes, people are asking for green burial, and cemeteries are trying to comply, but it's a new idea to many of them, and this our requirement that the cemetery be kept mowed and all this stuff is interfering with people's thinking about it.
Right, because they don't want the ground to sink, and they've got to get all those. Yeah, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, this has been a wonderful session, and I do appreciate our two speakers spending this much time.
Yes, they were both very good.
And I don't know if Sharon has given us any links to put in the chat, but if you would like to send them, we can send them out to people and put them, because you sent me some resources, and I must say I didn't explore them as much as I intended to, but I think that the links are very interesting that you shared with us.
When you'll be able to view this as a recording on our website in a week or two, and Sharon, I did jot down the webpage that you had in your presentation, but if there's anything else you'd like to make sure that I include on that final screen, just send it to the OMA.
Will do.
Address. Yeah.
I did attend some classes in First Unitarian church about legacy letters. And I understood, we didn't talk about that at all tonight, but I understood that one tradition in the Jewish community that, I mean, we do this stuff, I guess, and we make recordings and videos and things now, but the idea that one writes a legacy letter to the people that have been important in one's life, what they've meant, or pass on some wisdom to that you want to share and be remembered. I think that it seemed to me to be very meaningful as part of what one leaves behind as a gift to one's loved ones. But
yeah, I mean, basically that's something that I think exists in most traditions. It's just, sometimes it's called an ethical will, but that's also encouraged in non-Jewish traditions. It's my son is coming dressed funnily. Okay, you just stay right there.
He knows it's supposed to be over.
it now, people can write it out. You can do a video, you can do a recording. Not everyone does it for sure. They don't realize the importance of it until someone is gone, but it's a way of preserving memory and stories so that is not forgotten and lost. Everyone should do that anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else anyone wants to ask or say? Well, I would just like to say that we are having our next All's Well That Ends Well as a Zoom in the evening. Let's see, it's 6:30 on the 19th. So that's, oh, there you are. Hello, young man. So if any of you are interested or know anyone else that would benefit from one of our workshops, it's not a long, it's a couple of hours, and you end up with a real checklist of what to do to make way for your long-term care, to plan and give instruction about your long-term care while you're alive, but then your body disposition and your hopes and directions, anything that's important to you that you think would be meaningful for your loved ones to do in a memorial event or service of some kind. So is that on the website, Margot, and register for that?
Yes, and I just added the link into our chat here, but you'll be able to find it at omaoregon.org under education workshops.
Well, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Brian and Sharon, for your presentation, and Margot for your wonderful help all along. Good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good rest of the evening.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, speakers.